Jason Fladlien here with 3 elements of a successful webinar. I'm going to break them down for you here on this video. It's offer, paradigm shift, communication. Let's get into it. First thing is the offer. It's the number one most important thing that will make any webinar and really any campaign successful or a failure. My aim when I'm constructing and creating an offer is try to sell a $10 bill for $1. Because, if you could sell a $10 bill for $1, you would not have to be that good of a salesperson. It would just have to reach a bare minimum threshold of, is that thing counterfeit or not? And is this thing a trick or not? So I want to overwhelm somebody with so much value that they would say, holy cow, not buying costs more money than buying. This thing is so good, the money in my pocket is going to hurt me if I keep it in my pocket. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can go about it constructing an offer. One of my favorite ways is if we can put information inside of the offer, or we can put digital tools or templates inside of the offer, because these things cost next to nothing to deliver. It's ones and zeros. It's code on the internet for the most part. But they can be of immense value because ideas are valuable, because fill in the blank stuff is valuable. Checkboxes are valuable. Software and apps are valuable. So if I can go collect those from other sources, work deals with them, bake that into the offer, I can sell $10 bills for $1, and so can you. So how do we make the offer as powerful as possible? If I had 100 hours to work on a campaign, I would spend 80 hours on the offer and 20 hours on the rest. Now, here's a little hack for you. One of the best ways to make an offer better is to niche it down to a more specific audience that everybody else is stepping over. So as much as possible, try to look at an audience that is buying product in spite of the product. This is an audience who's marginalized, who says, this isn't really for me, and I know the product isn't that good, but I'm buying it anyway because I got nothing else. Give them something else, and then you could be average and have above average results. So the first element of a successful webinar that I focus on is the offer. Now, once we get the offer dialed in, then we work on the paradigm shift. Another way to think of the paradigm shift is the this changes everything moment, or the aha moment, or I call it the Archimedes moment, where he says, how do I figure out if gold is real or if it's counterfeit? And he can't figure it out. And then his wife draws him up a bath, and she says, don't worry, take a break, honey, you need it. And then he's sitting in the bath, and that's when he gets the aha moment, when he sees the bath and the bubbles rising and all this kind of stuff. I'm probably mistelling this story, but you get the idea, is this aha moment. ChatGPT right now, as I record this, is a paradigm shift. People are now looking at things completely differently, and their ability to create content, produce stuff that didn't exist before. And is it overblown? Is it overhyped? Probably. Do we really even truly understand it? No. But the excitedness of it is captivating markets. When Bitcoin really started to gain traction, it was a paradigm shift around traditional financing. Podcasting is a paradigm shift around ways that people have communicated historically in terms of information. Now, you can create paradigm shifts at a more micro level. My cat's not letting me. His paradigm shift is that he's got to be on my lap at all damn times. But here's the way I try to construct a paradigm shift. Make them feel so foolish that they can no longer hold on to the limitation that they once held dear. If somebody has an excuse, that's as big as they're going to be. So most people will not buy something because their excuse is bigger than the opportunity. And so somebody will maybe want to become a millionaire, but they're afraid of failure. That fear of failure will stop them more than any plan you could ever sell them on how to become a millionaire. And so I want somebody in that instance, when they reach for that excuse or that fear of failure, that it's not there anymore. So how do I go about doing that? So every portion of my content, of every webinar I've ever created, has went to answer that question. And that question is, when they go to reach for that excuse, how do I make it no longer there? So if somebody, say in the weight loss market, they have a compulsion for overeating. They said, no matter what I do, I can't stop overeating. And then they label it, whether accurately or not, as I have no willpower, I have no self-control. So the paradigm shift in that instance, if that's what the market believes in mass, is how do we either render willpower and self-control inert, diminish it in some way significantly so it no longer hoards itself over the individual, or how can we show them that in fact they do have willpower? They're just misusing it. Those are just a couple of the ways, and I would hit it from all of those perspectives. I would try to show them from every single perspective on how they look at something, that there's a shift in a paradigm of how they could look at something. And then the goal here is not to have them have a fear of their problems. The goal is to have their problems fear the individual instead. Not the individual fearing the problem fearing the individual. And it takes a lot of work in order to figure that out. And it takes a lot of effort. And it's not so obvious. So study my webinars. And when you study them, you'll see the superficialities of them. And that's where everybody else stops. They look at the techniques, the scripts, they look at the language patterns, and so on and so forth. But dig a little deeper. Say, what's Fladlien really doing here? What's the paradigm that he's attacking? And how is he creating a shift? So that person can no longer limit themselves. And when somebody is unlimited, they are willing to invest in ways to reach that infinite potential that otherwise they don't know exists. So that's number 2, paradigm shift. Number 3, communication. I was struggling with communicating this communication to you because it doesn't really say anything. But if I had to break it down in a variety of ways, like maybe you can help me in the chat with a better language for this third concept here, is I have to enter their world and how they look at it. And I have to communicate it into the terms that they can understand at the time. So often we make these mistakes as communicators, as marketers, by wanting people to come to us. So I have the insight, you need to meet me where I'm at. All my big successes were, I have the insight, now how can I meet it to where you're at? This doesn't mean we dumb it down. Far from it. If anything, we smarten it up. We make it so smart that it's impossible to misconstrue and misunderstand. But we have to say it in the language that the market can most understand it. Their language, not my language, not your language. I had a client come up to me once, and he said, I was speaking at an event. I was keynoting. It was a $5,000 per person event. And he brought his son. His son was 15 years old. And he says, on day 1, before anybody spoke, he says, I told my son to watch just these 3 presenters, if anybody. He says, specifically pay attention, and then he listed 2 other presenters, and then he listed me. So his son is now focused on, I'm supposed to be top dog there. He better pay attention to me. Dad said so. And there was like 20 speakers at this event. It was pretty intense. And then on the last day, as I was getting ready to leave, he approached me and he said, you know what? My son, he said he didn't understand anything any of these other speakers said. So the only speaker he understood was you, because you spoke in a language that was accessible to him. And I try to do that. I don't care what the audience is as much as possible. So I avoid jargon, for example. So at this market, you heard a lot of these things like EPCs and CPLs and blah, blah, blahs, earnings per click, cost per leads, a lot of jargon like that. I mean, it was just flowing. And here's what I've found is people in the market who think they know what it means still don't often know what it means. But they're too insecure to speak up and say, listen, I don't know what the hell this stuff is. This is space language? I don't understand any of this stuff. So I have obsessed on how can I communicate things in a way that I don't care if you're in the market or out of the market, you would understand them instantly. So I avoid jargon as much as possible. I also, when I communicate, I have to keep it interesting. This is a little bit more challenging for me so far on YouTube, but I'm learning, and this is what's good about this stuff. You keep doing this and you get better at it. See, in a live webinar where I've really honed my skills, there's interaction. There's a certain electricity and energy that's going on, and it's not me and a camera, it's me and a PowerPoint. And so I'm really good in that modality. You shift the context ever so subtly where there's no real live audience here, and it's me just looking at a camera. I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm crawling, then I'm gonna walk, then I'm gonna run, then I'm gonna fly, and then I'm gonna teleport. So I'm trying to figure that out still. But when it comes to presenting the information, I always ask myself, how can I do it in a way that's engaging and interesting when I communicate it? Because if you can just hold people's attention for 60 minutes, and I can do this on a webinar on some of the most boring, mundane topics when I communicate, because I've mastered some sort of vocal variety. So I don't speak in the same tone or the same cadence or the same rhythm over and over again. A lot of speakers do that. So I've learned to vary it up. I map out emotionally. When I communicate this, what's the map of emotions that when somebody is going through the webinar, at this point they're going to feel this, and at this point they're going to feel that, and at this point they're going to feel this, and how can I create tension? So there's a technique that I use in webinars that I don't ever really see taught that I call this push-pull tension, where you pull somebody in and then you push them away. Then you pull them in a little bit closer, and then you push them away. And then you keep this rhythm where you keep pulling them in closer and then pushing them away, and pretty soon they're leaning in. They want you to pull them closer. They're begging to be pulled closer. And so the way that this looks in the real world is you get them all excited about a concept, and then you say, but here's the problem with that. You pull them in with, oh, wow, this looks really good. This looks really interesting. And then here's the problem with that. However, with this problem, here's what I've discovered. And if you do it this way and you pull them back in, and you say, well, but here's the issue with that. And then you push them back out a little bit. And these dynamics of communication are very effective. But if none of that else matters, you got to speak in the language of the audience. You got to speak to their fears. You got to speak to their angers. You got to speak to their frustrations. You got to speak to their worries. You got to get inside of their head and figure out what are these negative feedback loops that run almost on repeat. The limiting self-talk that is engaged internally in this inner monologue that goes on over and over again in my prospect's head. So whatever the paradigm shift is, and however the offer is positioned, it's got to be vis-a-vis that internal dialogue, that self-talk. What's the market saying? How can I speak their language? And then how can I do it in a way that's interesting and engaging? The rest is technique. The rest is details. The rest of this stuff is you could practically copy and paste it in. But the high-level stuff, the things that matter, offer, paradigm shift, communication. Put those into your marketing, put those into your webinars, and I'd be surprised if you don't see a massive uplift. Let me know. I'll see you in the next video.